Hi everyone and welcome back. This is Mindy Eggen for My Favorite Things, and in today's video we are going to stretch our Christmas supplies a little bit to make a year-round greeting card. For today's card, I'm using the all lined up diagonally background stamp and the Well Hello stamp set along with the joyful wreath and the joy that goes with it. So to stamp my background, I'm going to use my Misty stamping tool to do this. I remove the backing of that background stamp and place it into my Misty, making sure to remove that foam insert in your Misty tool or this won't stamp very well. Then I'm taking some dot runner, I added it to the back of my cardstock, placed my cardstock where I wanted it on the stamp set, and then flipped that over. That little bit of adhesive will hold that down onto my Misty, and it's perfectly placed so I'm getting clean edges all the way around. Then I'll just prep that cardstock with an anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to ink up this background stamp with a Versamark ink, which is a really nice clear sticky ink, great for heat embossing or watermarking. Then I'll close the lid of the Misty, stamp that down really well, just giving that some good pressure. And I'm going to do it one more time because this is really hard to see on white cardstock, so I want to make sure I'm getting a really good impression. I'm going to take that stamped card panel and I'm going to sprinkle on some white embossing powder. So I'm holding my card flat, sprinkling on that embossing powder, and then tipping that card and dumping off the excess back into my container. That's going to give me really good coverage. Instead of just having your card tilted when you're sprinkling it on, make sure your card is kind of flat, and that really will help the embossing powder stick to those areas. Then after my heat gun is really nice and hot, I'm going to bring it over to the cardstock and melt that embossing powder. And you'll notice that it'll turn really shiny once it's melted. Now I'm going to give this a couple seconds to cool off, and I'm going to brush this over with a Swiffer cloth, and this just removes any excess powder that might have been left behind. Now I'm going to do just a real basic embossed resist, and I'm going to use Distress Oxides to do my background. And this background really would work great for any season. You could do this with the Christmas colors. Really, your colors will determine the theme of your card. I'm deciding to go with a real pastel rainbow. I think this would make a great card to send to school with my kids. They are going back to school. So I think this is just a really great card to send to a teacher because I think they are going to need all the joy that they can get right now in this school year. So I started off by applying some picked raspberry Distress Oxide. Then I'm going to come in with dried marigold, and I have scattered straw, cracked pistachio, and tumbled glass. I didn't have any room for the light purple, but that's where your envelopes can come into play. I like to pick out my envelopes to match my card, so I would pick out a really light purple to help complete my rainbow. So after I'm done applying all of my ink, I'm going to just go back over it a little bit, smooth out any edges. I wanted to bring that orange in a little bit more and that pink to just kind of brighten it up. Now, because we embossed, all of that ink has resisted on that embossing powder that we applied. So I'm just going to wipe that off with a rag and make that white embossing powder really stand out from the background. Then I'm going to trim off the edges. And I like to do this on most of my cards. I'm a big fan of having a really nice white margin. So this final panel is going to be 3 3/4 by 5 inches. So I'm taking 1/4 of an inch off of each side and the top and the bottom. And I'll be attaching this to an A2 size white card, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. The wreath I'm going to just die cut from white cardstock, and I'm just carefully kind of pulling that out. It's kind of fragile, so you want to be a little careful, which is going to look great on my white background. Then the word joy, I'm going to die cut from gold shine cardstock. So it's kind of a dull mirror cardstock. It's really pretty. Now for attaching my card front, I layered together 3 pieces of white cardstock that are 3 3/4 by 5 inches and attached my top panel to that. This adds complete dimension to the entire card panel that I created. Nothing will curl up. I have all of my edges complete. To attach the wreath, I'm going to use some liquid glue. I found this to be the easiest for me. So I'm just adding little dots to the leaves and the little part in between. And if you find you put too much glue on there, just tap it off with your finger to kind of smush that down a little bit. And then once I have the perfect placement, I'm just going to attach that to the middle of the card, hold that down for a couple seconds to make sure it's really attached. And the same thing for the word joy, just adding those little bits of liquid glue and then holding that down with my hand for a couple seconds or a minute or so just to make sure it's secured really well to the front of the card. Then we can move on to stamping an additional little sentiment. So the word joy would work just fine on its own. I really wanted to use the word hello, but I didn't have the die for it, and I really wanted to have that gold die cut word. So joy is my word, and I'm moving on to a sentiment from that Well Hello stamp set. I'm using my Mini Misty to do this on black cardstock. Once I had my sentiment lined up, I used my Misty corner to push that down, and that just helps straighten out that sentiment. So it's really nice and straight, and that will just make it easier for me when I'm trimming my sentiment out with a paper trimmer. So after prepping that again with an anti-static powder tool, inking the sentiment up with Versamark ink, I'm going to sprinkle on the white embossing powder again, tapping off any of that excess, and then I'll come in with my heat tool and just melt that embossing powder. And then once that's cooled off, you can wipe over with a Swiffer cloth to help remove any of that excess powder. And I'm lining up the bottom edge of my words with my paper trimmer. This is why using the Misty corners is really, really helpful. It's already straight on your cardstock, so this is helping me make sure this is straight when I'm cutting it. I'm going to use black foam squares to attach my little sentiment strip there. This just helps kind of disguise it. That way white foam squares would kind of stand out a little bit more if you're looking at it from the side. And once I have that done, I thought about adding jewels to the front, but I thought, well, I haven't used my dream drops in a while. I have Cloud 9, which is just a gorgeous kind of iridescent dream drop. And unfortunately, this is where my card met its demise. They're very beautiful, but they take a while to dry. So if you use the dream drops, please put it in a very safe spot. After my card was complete, I put it off on the side, but as I was putting all of my supplies away, I completely bumped all of my dream drops and I cleaned it up as best as I could. They are gorgeous. Just make sure you're putting it in a safe place. I hope you enjoyed today's inspiration, and we'll take a look at your Christmas stamps and die cuts. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.